in the original zone theory in Chicago, you would have a center to the city, usually designed around commerce or around, at that time it was different industry and commerce that involved transitioning into the western parts of the United States, developing those regions. Outside of the center of the city, which was the industrial area, we had this area which is where the workforce lived, in the housing, in the high density housing. And because of the economics of the time, a lot of the workers that lived in these zones, they worked in these zones and they weren't well paid. So a lot of these high density housing areas were referred to as ghettos because they were just so high density and so poorly taken care of. So low income ghettos and workforce housing. On the next zone, on the outskirts, might be an area of service, schools, hospitals, stores and businesses. And then as you continue drawing this almost like a bullseye, on the further outskirts become middle income, medium income, educated workers, people who might be in a different class, not so much blue collar, but they might be service providers. They're living in a higher income, single resident housing type neighborhood. And then on the farthest outskirts, as I draw my map here, the suburbs, this is where the wealthier people and the upper class people would live. Most cities aren't designed in a bullseye fashion. They kind of sprawl out now depending on how the geographic features of the community are. And what I want to show you is between the areas of commerce and where the workforce housing live, these are zones of transition. All right, they're zones of transition, and all a zone of transition is you transfer from one use of an area to another use of an area. The zones of transition are places where there's some social disorganization, and this is the places where, according to the zone theories, where crime occurs most. It's because there's no fixed or set use for that area. Going from the industry to the workforce housing in the ghetto areas, in this in-between space you had bars, brothels, you had gambling, you had visible deviance, and you also had the opportunity for crime. Best part about it is everybody in the suburbs, everybody in the middle income neighborhoods, everybody in the ghettos, everybody has to pass through zones of transition to get to work. What I'm going to demonstrate for you, I'm going to go out on the street. I'm going to actually show you a couple things as I continue to talk. I'm going to relate this theory from early 1900s Chicago to our modern day State College and Penn State University. Hey class, now we're at Penn State University. Penn State's the largest employer in Center County, and this is pretty much the hub of State College, since this is where most of the activity, a lot of businesses, a lot of the economy is central to this. We include the workforce as people that are employees of the university, and in my comparisons you can even begin to use the students as part of the workforce comparison, because so much of the high density housing is revolving around student housing. Point down this way here, the Millennium Science Building, you can see where I'm at. We have the Thomas Building in the back. When I attended school here, this used to be a main road. We're at the intersection of Shortridge and Pollock. This used to be a major intersection. But of course, you have all the buildings, you have this entire area is all classrooms. To the east, we have the residence halls and so on. Up this direction from where I'm at is Willard Hall, where we have class. Old Main is up there in the hub as well. As I continue to walk around here, show you this area. The road behind me heads down towards State College, and we go down to College Avenue, what's called Garner Street. Garner Street is a road that dissects through much of State College, and it's going to be the space that we use for our demonstration on the zone of transition. So the space that I have going down this road here, I want you to see this is a main funnel for students that come from downtown State College up onto campus. This is a main walkway, a main thoroughfare, if you will. We're going to go downtown and we're going to show you a little bit more and explain a little bit more what I mean from a zone of transition. If Penn State University is comparable to the central industry in the 1800s, continue my demonstration downtown. Yeah. Hey guys, we're down here on College Avenue at State College. This would be the markings of the zone of transition. College Avenue is a divider between State College and Penn State University, and behind me is where we originally filmed up at the university. So when you get to about Avenue, it really marks the zone of transition, and the space between College Avenue and Beaver, which is the block up this direction, is a unique area because it's bars, restaurants, and the key point about zones of transition is that in these zones, this is where the majority of the crime occurs, because there's not a finite or specified use for this. This block, for instance, happens to be where there's a lot of criminal activity, whether it be caused by drunkenness or visible deviance or just by predatory crime. That's what really is the purpose and understanding as you go from one use of territory being the university to the buildings behind me, high density student housing. This zone of transition in between is where you have a high concentration of crime. Hi guys, we're continuing with our discussion of zones of transition. I'm standing on the corner of Beaver Avenue and Garner Street in State College, Pennsylvania. Behind me, about one block down, is College Avenue, where I was previously. That space in between is considered a zone of transition. As I explained, it has a zone that doesn't have a fit use or a specific use. In 1900 Chicago, it would have been an area where there would have been a lot of visible deviance. There would have been a lot of opportunities for crime, particularly bars, casinos, gambling, brothels, and so on. We don't have that in State College, Pennsylvania. What we do have is we do have a lot of bars, we have restaurants, we have mixed-use areas, stores, and so on. What I want to show you now, Beaver Avenue being a marking spot of a zone of transition, as we move up the street here. This is Beaver Avenue, an area known as Beaver Canyon, and this is high-density housing, student housing. It would be comparable to the 1900s version of workforce housing or low income or even ghetto housing in some circumstances. Hey guys, back with Professor Baker. Right now I'm driving through an area called Calder Alley. It's in State College, Pennsylvania, and it actually is part of the zone of transition, if you will. It's that alley space that is between College Avenue and Beaver Avenue, and it happens to be an area where there's a considerable amount of crime and various problems in State College. In fact, the concentration of bars in Calder Alley is actually kind of low, but it's the side streets where there are a lot of bars. This is an area that's not traditionally well lit. You'll see a lot of intoxication, a lot of public urination. The dark areas are where there's drug distribution, but we don't have drug distribution and we don't have visible prostitution the way we do in some of the major cities. However, a lot of the deals and a lot of the arrangements that are made through those two types of crimes are actually constructed in the bars and in some of the venues that are in this zone of transition between College Avenue and Beaver Avenue. This alleyway extends up through State College about another half mile or so to our west. The alley that we just drove through, for instance, they have had aggravated assaults and robberies. The connection between alcohol, prostitution, various drug dealing, the connection is that where there's money, there's that opportunity for robbery. And that's the connection between the zones of transition and crime. So right now, I've just crossed over Beaver Avenue, and as I'm driving what would be south on Garner Street, I'm going past some of the high-density housing and apartment buildings. We're passing by the fraternity neighborhoods, which are to my right and left. Again, going from high-density housing into fraternities, this is a zone of transition. And again, an area where you have a lot of alcohol offenses, you have a lot of assaults related to that, not so much robbery, because there's not as much cash in this area as there is in bars or where there's ATM machines or where there's restaurants or other types of stores and venues. In the next block or so, we're going to really pass beyond the fraternities. Again, you're mostly going to have civil disorder and alcohol-related offenses in these neighborhoods. The sexual assaults that occur in the fraternity houses don't really apply to the zones of transition because they're more of a characteristic of the property and the activities inside the fraternity and not so much of the zones as the traditional zone theory explores. As we're going down the street here further, you'll notice now that the houses on our right and left have turned into single-family houses, and they're moderately sized single-family houses, though the property values here surprisingly are in the high 2s to low 300,000 price range. Going up some of the side streets in either direction, you can also get into some houses that may be touching 300,000 to 400,000, depending on the size and the square footage. We're at another zone of transition. We're going to cross over what's called Easterly Parkway. Easterly Parkway is another street that, in a sense, runs parallel with College and Beaver. However, we're probably about a half mile away now from the university, and we're transitioning again into a cluster of smaller, older homes. These homes, many of them were built in the 1950s and early 60s, and the property values here are in their 200,000 range as well. Very older neighborhood, nicely landscaped, mature trees. You're not going to have much crime in these neighborhoods because there's really no purpose for there's no purpose for people to be under the influence and passing through these areas. These are families and professionals mostly that live here, kind of outside of that 20 to 24-year-old age range that we talked about in class. And there's no ATM machines on this street. There's no bars. There's really no visible deviance. There's no street lights here either, which is also kind of unique. There's very limited street lights because of the mature trees. It's just an overall low crime neighborhood, and it's part of what they originally intended to have you understand with this zone theory. I'm crossing now, I'm getting very close geographically to South Atherton Street, and again, the houses now are expanding in their square footage. The acreage per lot is much larger, and we're further and further away from the campus. This might be the type of neighborhood where you would find tenured professors, senior administrators with the university living, for instance, retired people, older professionals, and so on. And that pretty much concludes my demonstration. If you remember, we started with being on campus, and we transitioned to College Avenue, Calder Way, over to Beaver Avenue, high-density housing, and this is a very typical way that you can look at a city. Most cities are structured this way, although instead of traveling a mere mile, as we have, you might see that you would have to travel several miles to get to that point where you see the actual transitions. That concludes the video on zones of transition. Thank you for paying attention, and talk to you later.